Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Justice with Jax. This is Season 2, Episode 1. I'm your host, Jacqueline Armendariz Unzueta, and I am so glad to be back, baby. And we have an incredible Episode 1 to start with, and I'm going to introduce my guest here shortly. But today is Friday, August 30th, 2024. It is 1 year and 30 days, or 396 days, since the case of Armendariz Chinook Center versus the City of Colorado Springs et al. Has been filed by the American Civil Liberties Union of Colorado, and boy, do we have some big updates for you. So I'm going to turn it over to my guest quickly, our friend Max, and he's going to share his pronouns, affiliations, let the people know who you are.
Awesome. Yeah, well, so good to be here. My name is Max Kronstadt. I use he, him pronouns. I am the co-founder and lead organizer of the Colorado Springs Pro-Housing Partnership. We've been around in a few different sort of iterations over the last 5 years or so, but are working to build a housing justice movement here in Colorado Springs through grassroots community organizing with folks who are being impacted by the housing crisis. So through that work have been connected. We've been fiscally sponsored by the Chinook Center and a member of the Chinook Center, and just in and around a lot of really good activist and organizer spaces in Colorado Springs. So
well said. And shout out to Chinook Center, my co-plaintiff in this case, right? And so I think that it's very special to me to be able to bring you today on the show because at the center of this story, which I never want us to lose sight of and related to this case, is that we were at a protest that was about housing for all, that housing is a human right. And so, my friends, the updates that I have to share, and Max and I were talking earlier this week, so he knows some of this, but not all of this, is that on August 21st, the ACLU filed the opening brief of Armendariz Chinook Center versus City of Colorado Springs and the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit. So applause, please. That's a huge deal. Yeah, we want to thank the ACLU for their continued support because if you recall, second to last episode last season, it was a really difficult time. The judge in our case had granted a motion to dismiss, and it was heartbreaking. So we're back, baby. We feel way different. The vibes are much better this time. And it's really interesting because obviously the vibes, just for democracy in general, have changed over the past month or two, right? And so I do want to share, if you don't mind, Max, a quick quote from the brief, because the brief itself is like maybe 60 plus pages. So I never expect anyone to read it. So the public service here is I'm trying to share the things that stick out to me and I think will be helpful for people to follow this case. But so basically this is the ACLU, our attorneys arguing why the court made an error in their ruling or order previously. And now we're in the Court of Appeals, and they will decide whether it goes back to the court, the lower court, to analyze again, essentially. And so our attorneys from ACLU said, under the district court's analysis, that's that first court, these facts of modern life would allow officers to comb through almost anyone's digital history in search of their ideas and beliefs, just as they did with Armendariz. An anti-abortion protester who jaywalks at a rally would lose her right to privacy in any communications she ever made about abortion, life, rights, and pro-life organizations with which she associates. A pro-Israel activist who draws a Jewish star on the side of a building would lose his right to privacy in any of his digital files mentioning Israel, Judaism, and stars, as well as associations with other activists and pro-Israel lobbyist groups. A woman who obstructs traffic during a women's march would lose her right to privacy in any discussions of women and their rights, health issues, and obligations, and in her associations with any other women who might have participated in the same way or other women's marches. These dystopian visions are devoid of the breathing space that First Amendment freedoms need to survive. So that to me is the gist of why we're still fighting with this case, because people have a right to free speech. They have a right to say that housing is a human right, and we have a right to privacy. And so the second big update here is that on August 28th, the Amicus Brief was filed in the circuit court in support of our case. And what that means, are you familiar with the term Amicus Brief?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. You tell the people what it means. I'm talking too much.
It means it's a friend of the court brief.
Indeed.
So it's essentially
Latin, amicus, friend, right?
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's essentially some sort of outside party writing to the court and advising them to do something in a certain way. for a specific reason.
That's why I like Max. He's really smart. So, and among many other awesome things about you. So yes, exactly that. And so what that means is that these are other entities working for democracy, protecting freedom, privacy, that they basically explain to the circuit courts, like, wait, we have an interest in this too, and here's why. And for me, it's kind of life goals stuff that anything that I could ever do would be associated with this type of organization. So I'm going to read out and just say a great big thank you to the organizations that signed on to this Amicus Brief, because they are the Electronic Frontier Foundation, big fans of them well before this, the Center for Democracy and Technology, incredible, the Electronic Privacy Information Center, well done there with their work, and as a former journalist, newspaper kid, the Knight First Amendment Institute, like that blew my mind. And so I want to read quickly a little bit of what they said, and thanks for listening along with me, Max. So here's what they wrote. The Constitution does not permit law enforcement to use an arrest for a low-level physical offense combined with allegations based on mere conjecture to justify dragnet seizures and searches of electronic devices or communications, especially when those searches are aimed at uncovering political speech. But this is exactly what the city of Colorado Springs and its officers asked this court to accept. Side note, not part of the brief, but that's something we can never accept, right? And so we'll keep fighting. They went on to say that based on little more than unsupported allegations, the appellees sought, or the cops and the government, sought and received broad warrants authorizing the search and seizure of multiple laptops and cell phones belonging to Ms. Armendariz, and a search through a week's worth of data, including private messages associated with the Chinook Center's Facebook page or account. These seizures and searches presented an extraordinary invasion of privacy and threatened First Amendment protected speech. And so thank you for letting me take a moment to take a beat on some of the very powerful language that the attorneys fighting for your freedom, your right to privacy, your right to free speech from ACLU of Colorado have produced in this last week. So, wow, kind of heavy stuff. Max, what do you think? I always want to, pass the mic. Do you have any other thoughts or comments upon hearing this latest update? Because Max is one of the great people who asks about updates. Like, there are people in this community who really want to know about this case, which is why this podcast exists. So what do you think, Max?
Yeah, well, I mean, I am not a lawyer, obviously, but I think it's awesome that you all are continuing to fight. I think it's good to get good news. I know, we've talked about how it's going to be, long haul stuff.
It's a journey.
But often the things that are most worth doing are those long haul efforts. So kudos to you all, and glad you have some good folks on your side, but not surprised.
Truly, yeah, and well said. We're definitely going to dive into that, the long haul, the visionary shit, man. We got to think ahead, right? And so we're going to talk about that when it comes to the Colorado Springs Pro Housing Partnership. And here's a really incredible thing that I would like to share. Part of why Max is here is I am elated to have accepted a board position with the Colorado Springs Pro Housing Partnership. I can't wait to work my ass off to achieve the vision over time. Like, part of what we intend to do is invest the time necessary to really achieve systemic change, because that's what that is about. And so do you want to take a little bit of a beat there to, if people haven't heard of the Pro Housing Partnership before, tell us the mission and all the good stuff.
Yeah, sure. Well, so our goal is, as I said at the beginning of the show, sort of to build a housing justice movement through grassroots community organizing in Colorado Springs. And so sort of to break down what all of those different things mean.
Yeah.
When we talk about organizing...
It might have a few moving parts.
Right.
Yeah? Okay.
When we talk about organizing, we were talking specifically about structure-based organizing. So organizing within groups of people who don't necessarily share some sort of political affiliation or ideology or anything like that, but rather are all tenants of the same landlord, all live in the same neighborhood, are all unhoused here in Colorado Springs. They're all part of a community, and they are all facing similar issues. The reason that's important is it is by organizing within these structures, we force ourselves to talk to people who might not agree with us, talk to people who aren't involved in the conversation already, and in doing so actually build power towards being able to make changes in the future, right? And so, and every organizing campaign is obviously going to have its own goals. So we organize in the Mill Street neighborhood, which is a historically working class neighborhood on the south end of downtown Colorado Springs.
That's right by like America the Beautiful. Would you kind of paint a picture of it location wise? Yeah,
so it's like south of America the Beautiful and like the new Widener Field. From there down to like sort of the Springs Rescue Mission, I-25, from like where the old Martin Drake power plant was to like Nevada Avenue. So it's sort of that chunk directly south of downtown, where people are worried about being displaced because there's rising costs. So, we have a specific set of goals within that, and then organizing with tenants who have a specific set of goals related to their landlord and issues they're having with their landlord. And so our organization's goals is like to win those specific things, right? Win meaningful change, help people win meaningful change for their communities, but simultaneously build towards being able to make bigger changes at the city level and form part of like a state and national, housing justice movement in the future.
Beautiful.
So that's who we are and our goals. And we've been doing that for like 2 years.
Excellent. So like we said, like any good like deep work is going to take time. And I think for anyone who considers themselves an activist or advocate, come to peace with that if you haven't accepted that already. And part of what we've talked about on this show, which I'm really is meaningful for me, is systems are big and unwieldy, and there's many angles with which to affect change, right? So we talk about this case and the hardship that the journey has been. At least we're feeling better now, and that's one angle. But Colorado Springs Pro Housing Partnership is yet another angle, right? And so it was, I don't know if you knew this, Max, but I'm telling you now, is that there was something really meaningful that you said to me where I was like, damn, that's what's up, is as we've been, I've been catching up on the information in the organization's work is, I will forever be chasing accountability with the fact that just because we were out there saying housing is a human right, we became criminals and my First Amendment and Fourth Amendment rights were violated. And that was me just speaking. That's me just using the First Amendment. Well, now with Pro Housing Partnership, I get to do a lot more than just say housing is a human right and invest in a deeper work to support that mission. So thank you for letting me hop on board.
Well, we're glad to have you. Yeah.
I appreciate that.
For being willing to put in the time.
Absolutely. And so I think another thing that's been important about this podcast that I mentioned is the ripple effects of what these violations have on a community. And so, as you mentioned, you've been connected to Chinook Center as an organization yourself. And so can you just tell me a little bit, like, a disclaimer that we often make on this show, not an attorney. I am speaking for myself. I am not speaking for the Pro Housing Partnership. Max is here representing. And so clarity is kindness. We'll make that clear. But with that said, I would love to hear from you just your lived experience as a community member hearing about this case, because it's obviously different. I'm being directly involved versus community talks. We're trying to build together. We're getting more and more connected and organized. So tell me like what you remember, and especially as an organization under the umbrella of Chinook, those feelings of like, wait, we were just violated because of the undercover TSPD officer that we eventually realized was related to the actions in my case right now. So take it away, Max.
Yeah. Well, I was really only peripherally involved in a lot of what was going on at that time. I do remember, and the Pro Housing Partnership's gotten more involved with Chinook the last like 2 years or so. I don't think we weren't even like a real organization at the time that all this happened.
Right, 501c3 status was just granted for PHP, right?
And in 2021, when all the housing march stuff was happening, we weren't even fiscally sponsored. Mm-hmm. We existed only in name, right?
Gotcha, right.
But I was a part of like the Housing for All coalition group,
right, which was the organizer of the march.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I remember like going to those meetings and learning about the march, and actually the day of the march, I was supposed to come.
I figured.
And speak, and I was moving. houses, and that was kind of a mess. And then so I got there late. And by the time I got there, everyone had already been arrested.
Yeah. I did not know that, Max. I kind of wondered. I figured you would be there because you and I have crossed paths so many times working on this subject. And
then I think just learning about how deep it all went was pretty crazy to me. I mean, I remember having some reservations before the march about thinking like, is this group ready for this? Because I felt like we were still relatively small, and obviously there was a lot of work that went into planning and doing that march. But the juxtaposition of sort of like my concerns, like, are we ready to do this type of action? And then the CSPD and the FBI, like, considering that group to be like a major threat to national security was pretty crazy to me. But, as I've gotten older and learned about our history, then it all becomes a little bit. It all becomes a little bit less shocking. That was sort of my experience with those events.
Interesting how, I don't believe in coincidences. And so interesting how that played out, because I've heard from other people in the community that were like, yeah, I wanted to go that day, but something important happened and they weren't there. And I think that part of what you missed that day, which we have talked about on this podcast, is like, there's no way we could have known that the law enforcement thought we were these radical leftist terrorists, or we had no idea we were being infiltrated by an undercover cop. Like, just really the night and day between the bias and perception that law enforcement had towards us versus like who we really are. and obviously that's, a pain point. And so I agree with you. I mean, something that we've learned from these moments is we can do better being organized. And that's something that PHP's mission is. We're going to do the deep work on that because it's so necessary. And so, we talked about, like, you are definitely an embedded community organizer by now. How many years would you say in Colorado Springs you've been a community organizer?
I think it's a tricky question to answer because I got started with this work in like the summer of 2019. So by that metric, sort of 5 years.
Yeah.
And I considered what we were doing at the time, which was trying to advocate for better zoning laws and trying to get other people to come and advocate for better zoning laws in the city. At the time, we considered that to be community organizing.
I would say so.
But I since have learned that I now don't consider what we were doing at the time to be community organizing. What we were doing was really more sort of mobilizing.
Oh, yes. Talk about those nuances. That's right. Because I agree with you. Like, what do you mean it's not organizing? Like, you're getting people to go somewhere. Dig deeper on that one.
Yeah, well, so I ascribe to the late, great Jane McAlevy's sort of school of thought around theories of change and how those all sort of break down. And the way she talks about it, right, is like mobilizing is when you're like, we're going to get all the people who agree with us about this, right, whether it's like better zoning laws or some sort of environmental regulation that's needed or whatever.
Call your senator sort of stuff, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Like go to city. And what we were doing is getting people to go to city council.
Right. Accessory dwelling units.
We were talking
really
about
sexy housing policy stuff.
But we weren't working within structures. We weren't talking to people who didn't already agree with us, and we weren't expanding the base of power for housing justice systems change. So I, in sort of like the summer of 2021 was when I started to really learn about this school of thought. I was working at the time for the Colorado Trust as a community organizer in the city of Fountain, and the work of the Pro Housing Partnership was more or less on hold. And so it was like over that time sort of learning about organizing that I started to develop this new vision for the Pro Housing Partnership, which is like, let's do this structure-based organizing around housing issues, and try to build towards a movement long term, and not sort of immediately go to city council and say like, we need this change, because we weren't ready for that.
Which is, let's talk about kind of the human element of that too, which is, I think we've mentioned on this show as well, is that the deep work that you have to do, and the time that it takes, it can be like misleadingly I think people can drop off, right? Like, how do you deal with that as an organizer and talk about that? Because it comes up again and again and again, because people are like, hell yeah, I'm going to go to City Hall. I'm going to lose my shit. They need to hear what I think. And yeah, that's very gratifying. And that is work that should be done. But I would say, and definitely take the words out of my mouth if I'm not describing it right, but I would say that there's more to do to be effective.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that we discovered after, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years of the approach of like, let's get all these people who agree with us to City Hall to speak on these things, is that those people were also doing a million other things in our community, right? They were they are and were the community activists who were doing a lot of really great work. What that meant was their time was split in a million different directions. And so it became very hard to sustain the type of work that we were trying to do because people were getting burnt out, or they just were having to prioritize other things.
Right.
And so I think that shifting that approach to be, let's work with a group of people who have very immediate stakes in terms of what they're fighting for. It's like, I don't want to be pushed out of my neighborhood. I don't want to lose my housing, right? So the fight is a lot more visceral, and it's a lot more immediate, right? We're not talking about some zoning policy that
is like one chunk of this overall plan that
and really hard to understand.
Yeah.
And we're doing that and trying to use that as a way to build towards something bigger. And so I think it just feels a little bit more tangible and in that way feels a little bit more sustainable.
Yeah, but you might have to be patient.
Yeah.
You might have to keep showing up on a regular basis, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not even saying, like, it's not that we can't have both, but it's about how to be effective.
Right.
Is really what we're trying to get at, right?
This is kind of a funny, well, anyway, I was talking to Liam Reynolds, who was one of the co-founders of the organization.
Right, and
on
my
the board,
fellow board member.
On the board.
Yeah.
And he was talking about watching an interview with Steph Curry.
Okay.
So a little sports reference here, and about, like, it was sort of a question about, like, what advice would you give to young players? Okay. And he was like, you have to fall in love with the process.
Ooh,
and so we were sort of talking,
we
were talking about that in the context of, like, movement building, community organizing, which is like, if you go into it thinking like, I'm going to go to city council, I'm going to yell at them, and then they're going to do what I want, and if they don't, then like I haven't succeeded, then like you're going to get burnt out pretty quickly,
and you might
right?
be missing the point.
Right. Yeah. And so instead, like, this is a lifelong process of like trying to build the sorts of movements that can create the world we want to live in, and so just trying to commit myself and commit the organization to that process, I think, has been really liberating in a lot of ways in terms of like how I show up in the world.
Well said. That's exciting. And I would like to ask if you have any other thoughts too, because I feel the passion from that, and that's why it's so exciting for me to sign on, because it's not for me. It's like, oh, and next year I'll just find another volunteer. Like, no, I'm like, we got a good 10 years, right, babe? Like, but I want to talk a little bit about if you had any thoughts of, because this is something that's really profound for me, and I'm going to keep bringing it up whenever I can, is that odd is a diplomatic word. This case has very specific arguments in my name and the Chinook Center. Not included in those arguments is the violation of the undercover CSPD officer. As we unraveled this, we discovered that largely when they infiltrated the Chinook Center, the tenants union that existed at the time, which I would love to have them on this show. I haven't reached out. I need to, but I know it's very sensitive, so I've been wanting to just give them time and space. But essentially, the officer most infiltrated that tenants union, which was taking action and organizing to protect themselves from slumlords. And bad property owners, and so and advocate for tenants' rights. And really, as a result of that violation, as I understand it, and Max, if you have any more info, I understand the tenants union never came back. And I am so proud and pleased that PHP it's like you tried to shut it down there. Well, guess what? We're going to pop up here, here, and here. And that's kind of what PHP has done, which is incredible. But can you tell me a little bit about just you as a person, you as an organization there, you seeing that happen to the tenants union? How did you feel about those violations? Like, I think it's detestable that as a result of them investigating us only for our political beliefs, no crimes were ever committed. We lost a tenants union that was doing important work.
Yeah, I mean, I can't. So I wasn't involved with.
Right, they were totally different entity. Yeah.
Right, and at the I mean, we're talking about 2021, so
Yeah.
we hadn't even sort of developed like this new vision for the pro-housing partnership that included tenant organizing at that time. So like I was not particularly close to it, so
Gotcha.
I've really only heard about it from like whatever meetings at Chinook or through you or through John or I do know some of the folks who were involved in that.
And they're still in this community, right? They
absolutely.
still live here.
Yeah. I mean, like obviously it sucks, right?
Yeah.
And
it makes me really mad.
Yeah.
And that's why, like, this is so meaningful to me because it's not, like you said, you weren't directly related to the tenants union. Neither was I, but we all knew they existed and we were all proud of what they were doing. And they were making headway, right? It was something. And then to see that go away as a result of this violation, again, when no crime was committed, that to me is heartbreaking. And I am really grateful that it didn't dissuade people like you, though. Tell me about that. It's like, as a person who saw that happen, like, I'm glad you're badass enough to be like, whatever, we're still going to organize, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at our history, right? Like in
American history,
American
like
history.
U.S. history
Right.
at large.
Yeah.
Got it.
Like if movements get big enough or start to form, right? Like these are the sorts of things that are going to happen. And so I think you can, like, it sucks and right, like it's information. We have this information, so like what are we going to do about it and what can be done about it? And I mean, I think that's easy to say as someone who wasn't personally affected.
Fair enough. I appreciate that.
But I mean, I do think like from our perspective, it's like, all right, this is like a, we're in a battle for this country, and with these big corporations and who represent landlords and developers and these people who are trying to commodify our existence.
That's an entire podcast in itself that maybe we should think about doing.
I would love that. And those people are going to weaponize law enforcement typically to try and suppress people from fighting back. They're going to use all sorts of tactics to suppress people from fighting back, right? I mean, their favorite one is to divide people on the basis of race and other cultural issues, right? So we have to be aware of like all of the tools that they are going to use and then come up with how we are going to address them. And I mean, in terms of our vision of trying to build a tenant union, I think what we've been trying to do is like just start with individual buildings, start with individual landlords in a not super public way.
Because that's what happens when you're very public. Like there's added risk, right? Like that's how I would kind of frame an element of the housing march, because we were all gung-ho. If you remember, the housing march took place because it was the deadline for the evictions moratorium at the time that was in place because of the pandemic.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, we were out there, and that's particularly why I was out there, because at the time, as I've mentioned, I was the regional representative, Pueblo and Southeastern Colorado, for U.S. Senator Michael Bennett's office. And so I felt so strongly, as someone who was passionate about housing being health and safety for people, I was like, I got to be out there. I got to know what my community is saying, because we were watching that federal level policy. And thankfully, I think ultimately it was extended, but that is why that date was picked. And I remember too, particularly, I remember the march being, since you went to some of those organizing meetings, what I really wanted to hear about is the group had done work to like essentially have, I don't know, it wouldn't not a list of demands, but concerns, right? And I wanted to hear them because my community had come up with them, and that never came to pass because we were disrupted. But, do you remember some of what was talked about in those meetings about the housing concerns? It's been a while. If you don't,
I don't.
That's okay.
I'm sure it was the same stuff, right?
Because we've been in crisis. We've been in a housing crisis
that's going on, yeah,
for years and years now. Yeah. And so there was a lot of meaning, I think, behind the action that took place. But I will speak for myself, but I don't think I'm the only one that, as a result of that, the profound realization is like, oh, we better organize with more sustainability in mind. And especially, I really feel you when you say, Max, like the people who show up to city council when you want to mobilize, they're already really active, mostly, right? Have you ever heard of what's called like the 80-20 rule? It's a thought that 20% of the people do 80% of the work, right? And so those people just keep showing up over and over. So how do we do better and have a better percentage of real action, right? And so that's kind of how I think about this. And so tell us a little bit more about, I think you've done a good job of explaining the PHP timeline, but tell us a little bit more about the moment where you're like, okay, we're going to be a 501c3, and like especially emphasizing we want to know what's good in the community on this show too, because it can get a little heavy. We realize that. But PHP is doing some really good things. And so if there's like calls to action that maybe people could participate in, or if they just get in touch with you, but tell us more about the journey so far. And now we're like officially official. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I got so I was working for the Colorado Trust, and then my job ended abruptly in the summer of 2022.
Okay.
And so that was, and I'd always sort of been thinking, like, I'd started organizing in the Mill Street neighborhood in the summer of 2021 because even though that wasn't my job, my supervisor recognized that was important.
The value, yeah.
And was like, if you need to take some of your time to be doing this work, organizing in this Mill Street neighborhood, you should do that. And so I'd already sort of, it was through that first year of organizing Mill Street that I came to understand, like, oh, this is what this organization could be about, right? Organizing in these specific neighborhoods, these apartment buildings, maybe someday mobile home parks,
That's a big one.
around these specific issues, but the building towards something bigger. So yeah, I sort of in the summer of 2022 started working on it, became fiscally sponsored by Chinook Center, have been raising money. We've had some smaller wins, I think.
Please share those. We want that good stuff, right? We got to have a balance of this heavy, serious with, like we've been saying, it is a time investment. And so remember to celebrate the wins when you can. I'm all about that. So please share away.
Yeah. Well, so this would take a little bit. The short version is the Mill Street neighborhood is facing demolition of homes through a rail reconstruction project that the city has proposed.
Okay. Is this Front Range Rail related or something?
No,
okay.
It's related to the rail bridges over South Tejon and South Nevada.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So we, through a collective push through that neighborhood, got the city to agree to put that project on hold and sort of reconsider it after their like environmental review phase is complete. So not a full win, but definitely a step in the right direction on that. Trying to arrest this long and troubled history of the demolition of homes in working class neighborhoods, which is something that we've done a lot of in Colorado Springs.
I presume, and I don't know that much, but contextually, are you able to share that statement is really poignant with regard, for example, to like why America the Beautiful Park exists? Tell the people. I know you know that story probably.
Yeah, so there's there's a few instances in particular on the south and west of downtown. So the one that I think more people know about was the Conejos neighborhood, which was a working class, predominantly Latinx neighborhood that was bulldozed in the late 1990s to make room for America the Beautiful Park. But in addition to that, they're also to expand Martin Drake. I think 2 or 3 times over history, like in the 80s and in the 2000s, a dozen to 2 dozen homes were taken out of the Mill Street neighborhood. The Lowell neighborhood, which is like where CSPD's headquarters are now. That was Lowell Middle School, that building. And there was a thriving working class neighborhood over there. One of the leaders in Mill Street was
displaced from that area.
Their home was bulldozed out of that neighborhood.
Wow. And so that person is like facing round two of that displacement.
Yeah.
That's horrifying.
And then the near west side, I think also when I-25 was expanded, I don't know exactly when that was. That was a historically black neighborhood that was had a lot of homes taken out for the expansion of I-25. So it's a long history. Yeah, and
I think thank you for being here to share it, because it's not a lot of people are talking about it, right? There's a lot of things that we can draw our attention to, and so it's not a indictment of anyone, but we are here to do the work to speak the truth about this topic.
Yeah. So that was one positive thing, and then we work with the Centennial Plaza Tenants Association.
They are so exciting to me. If people don't know about them, can you say a little bit more about them?
Yeah.
Because they've had some news stories. They're like doing good work.
I'm sure they'd love to come on the pod.
Okay, good. Great.
I know you've got a lineup, I'm sure, but the Centennial Plaza is a 99-unit building owned by the Colorado Springs Housing Authority. It's on East Kiowa Street. They have organized a tenants association, which is the first public housing tenants association in the history of Colorado Springs, and have been trying to make changes in their building to regain sort of control over their lives and over what goes on there. One of the big things, they had a petition recently that over 70% of the building signed,
which is no small feat. Trust us as organizers, that is hard.
And what they won was what should have been pretty basic, but the right to gather in their common areas without permission from the housing authority.
That blows my mind. It really does, right? And like, where's the freedom in that? Like, we literally have a freedom to gather in America in theory, and yet and kudos to them. Let's just give some really big kudos to them for the work that they did to get that autonomy. Really, is what I would say. Yeah.
And that was
well done.
Folks from Chinook helped them at the beginning, and residents have been leading there the whole time, but in terms of organizing support, it started with folks from Chinook, and then they sort of handed it off to me and Pro Housing. But it's been good. And then the Colorado Springs Homeless Union, that's sort of our newest project, but it's about a year now, and
I have so much respect for them as well. When was that? They went to city council. When was that about? And that was an incredibly powerful moment. Like, we're not talking shit about mobilizing. Mobilizing still has a place too, right? So if people listening missed that moment, it was like this past year, right? Can you kind of give them a framing for it?
There were two, so city council twice, in October and then in February. One was to just introduce themselves as an organization. So Colorado Springs Homeless Union, the idea is it's a organization made up of and led by people who either are currently unhoused or have been unhoused in the city of Colorado Springs, or other cities, I suppose. And they are trying to organize their community to push for real solutions to homelessness rather than what our city is mostly doing these days. And so they went in October to just present a letter and outline
this past October.
Yep.
Okay,
of
gotcha.
23. Sort of their key issues being more humane street outreach. So instead of the police having
HOT.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. That stands for Homeless Outreach Team under CSPD.
Under CSPD.
Yeah.
And they essentially, it's interesting because and I wasn't around for a lot of this, but when HOT was founded, it was much more about trying to connect folks with resources.
That is what I recall as well.
And it has shifted over the years to be about
enforcement,
giving people tickets that they can't pay,
right?
And taking people's stuff that they need to survive, only to have people, right? Like, they were camping because they didn't have anywhere else to go, right? They either they're too poor to afford housing.
Just dig in the hole deeper for people who are already extremely vulnerable.
Right. So that one,
yeah.
expanded shelter options, because right, that's what the hot team, these two things are really connected, because what the hot team will say is that you can go to Springs Rescue Mission. And Springs Rescue Mission, you know,
some people would call problematic.
well, and I don't want, you know,
There's not an indictment here,
Yeah.
but there's real concerns.
well, it works for some people, right?
Right.
And it really doesn't work for other people. And also, they have 450 beds. I know they say they won't turn anyone away, but even the point in time count, which is like way under count of people experiencing homelessness, it's like 13,
Every January,
13,
right?
yeah, there's like 1,300 people.
Wow.
So you're not going to cram 1,300 people into Springs Rescue Mission. So the math is off. Plus, a lot of people are banned from Springs Rescue Mission.
Right.
So anyway, people feel like their choices are either go there, and maybe that doesn't work for them, or maybe they're not allowed to, or can't, right? And those are two bad choices, and yeah. So we're thinking.
The fact that the union is putting a voice to this, again, this is the beginning of the long, deep work that is necessary. And so I really, really respect that. And again, yet another reason why I'm here to work my ass off for PHP, because that's the kind of work that I believe in, you know. And can I ask you something that always comes to mind when we talk about the housing crisis, something, and, you know, tell me if I'm off, but my sense of things when we try to affect systemic change and talk to policymakers, our electeds, is, I mean, I get really upset that it seems like at many different levels of local governments, they're like, oh, well, housing crisis, that's not really like our scope. Like I hear in the city a lot, right? Depending on the administration, right? All that, addressing housing crisis is not part of the city scope per se. And then I know at the state level, obviously there's been some bills and in action, but I don't think that any one level of government is going to be able to solve it, right? It is a complicated tapestry. And then, of course, we have the federal level of government, which everything under the sun is their jurisdiction. So, of course, we have HUD as part of it, but there's a complexity to it that I think, you know, of course, is part of what makes this work challenging. But I guess my question here is, do you call bullshit on any elected officials who say that, well, housing's not really in our scope as a place where we can make policy or make a difference?
I mean, I guess, right? It's like, if you don't want it to be in your scope, then I guess that's your prerogative. But yeah. I'm not really sure what the point of government is, if not to like solve pressing problems that we have. Right. And
am I off? Have you heard like elected say that? Have you heard city officials say that? Or?
You know, I think that the crisis has gotten bad enough that people recognize that there is a problem, yeah. and
it's like, if
maybe
you're not going to fix it, who's fixing it?
Right. But I think the issue is the sort of dominant idea within city government is that the problem is housing supply. And it's tough because there's some
truth to that.
There's truth to that in the sense that, like, yeah, people are moving to the city in large numbers, and we aren't building housing at the same pace. We had this period after the 2008, housing market crash where no new housing was built, and that sort of laid the groundwork for the
troubles now.
Yeah, the like double digit, or like the doubling of the average home sale price and things like that, right? The kind of crazy out of control things that we're seeing. And there's just no way that we are going to build our way out of this problem because we don't have building just doesn't happen that fast. It doesn't happen at that scale. And the building industry is not going to they're not going to build to the point that housing is truly affordable, because it would hurt their bottom line, right? And they say that in the Gazette, right? Like you hear, it's like this, it feels like being gaslit sometimes, because you go to these forums where they're talking about, it's about supply. And then you read in the Gazette where, I think it was like one of the VPs of Widener was...
That's the development we just talked about by Mill Street.
Yeah, Widener. And they're one of the like 50 biggest landlords in the U.S. They're massive.
Oh, wow. I had no idea.
Saying that, like, it was a question of whether downtown is overbuilt. right? And he was sort of saying, we don't think it's overbuilt. We're still seeing price increases, right? So, like, if they were to see rents start to come down, that would be a sign to them to stop building. So, like, we're just not, there's no way that we're going to fix the problem on the supply side.
Thank you for saying that, because I think that's a great segue to another piece of this that, you know, always really gets me, is that there are deep moneyed interests that are part of this equation and process. And honestly, I find it deeply upsetting when I see you reference like the discourse that happens, right? And the developers and the landlords, like, really the thumb that they have on the scale, right? Because at the risk, like, I am not as well researched as Max by any means, but I think it's a problem when we hear them saying like, oh, well, this is too expensive, and holding us accountable for like properly building structures and having to go through the government in any way just makes it all too expensive, so we can't build. So it's all your fault, government, because you are mandating safe, healthy housing, and we just can't make that affordable. Tell me more. I don't know if I did that justice, but I think you get what I mean.
Yeah, for sure. I was at a forum. It was like an El Pomar thing. Or I don't know if it was an El Pomar thing. It was at El Pomar.
Oh, gotcha.
And it was one of these, like, how do we solve the housing crisis?
Yeah.
And you can be a little bit cynical when the panel about how to solve the housing crisis is all
landlords.
It's all industry reps.
Yeah.
And the solutions that they're coming up with are deregulate the building industry and deregulate, the apartment rental industry.
Oh God, that's terrifying. Deregulation of the apartment industry.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, and they were really criticizing some of the bills that have been passed at the state level that are trying to protect tenants, because they're saying, oh, it's going to make it harder on landlords. That's going to
we're going to have to charge more. We're going to have to add more fees on things, right? Which is total bullshit.
Yeah, yeah. And also, like, right, tenants need relief now because of housing market conditions and because of wealth inequality in this country. Big corporations, big hedge funds, and sort of institutional investors are buying up our multifamily housing stock and our single family housing stock.
Investors is a nice word. Vultures. Sorry.
Yeah.
What? Say that last part again. They're buying up what parts of our stock?
All of it. They're buying up our housing. Yeah. Our land and housing, and what they want to do with it is make money. And the way that they make money is they increase rents and they decrease cost to themselves, which means like fixing things and paying people to fix things. And so that's like the experience that people are having in the housing market, is their landlords are increasingly these faceless corporate entities who are charging them a lot of money, not refusing to fix anything, and like maybe evicting them if they are speaking out.
Exactly. Yeah. Refusing to fix things and then retaliating against people when they advocate for themselves. Yeah. That is appalling. Yeah. And I might have like an HOA podcast down the road. Max and I have talked about my HOA experience, but can we take a beat here too? Because what you were talking about the wealth inequality, which is so related to housing. If you don't mind telling the people, I'll tell them first. I'm 37 going on 38. How old are you, Max?
I'm 27.
27. Okay. So I would call us colleagues, peers, right? Like generationally, you're right behind me. And how often are you hearing when you talk about the housing subject, especially from like our cohort, younger people, really the devastation? I mean, if you go online, there's all the memes that we use as therapy, but the real profound truth that most young people today are like, wow, I'm fucked. I'm never going to own a house. I'm never going to own property. I've somehow managed to eke it out myself, but I still live in an HOA that has been discriminating and targeting me ever since I moved there because I speak out. But so how do we talk about that? What can we do more? And I guess it's kind of like I'm asking about a temperature check. Like, it seems really profound. We know the wealth inequity is profound. We know it's profoundly impacting young people. And obviously you're going to fix it all, Max, by flipping a switch. Where do we go from here? And what are you hearing about that?
Yeah. Well, I guess to the first part of that, I mean, we can talk about wealth inequality in a very academic way, but the way that it plays out on the ground is very visceral, right? It's people losing their home. It's people having to make really difficult decisions between
being overdrawn on our bank accounts, all the things.
Paying the rent, or paying for clothes for their kids. People dying, premature deaths because their apartments are unsafe. It's like death, disease, and sadness, and I mean that's what it means for people.
Yeah, housing is health and safety.
Yeah.
Period.
And so in terms of where do we go from here, the only place to go from here is to fight back against these corporate giants and their allies in politics.
Sounds easy. Sounds easy peasy.
Well, what's lucky
We've
for
got some
us
good things here. Yeah.
is that people are doing it, and people are doing it all around the country. I was recently able to attend the launch of a group called the Tenant Union Federation. Ooh. So it's 5 local tenant unions from around the country. They're in like Kansas City, Chicago, Connecticut, a few other places that I'm not remembering. And they are talking about, a national federation of tenant unions that shares resources, that shares best practices, and that is a hub for the tenant movement, right? And I mean, this is how we change things. Is
that long, deep work.
Yep, we organize people at a building by building, apartment by apartment, city by city, and then we pool that people power, and at some point people contributing their own resources to fund the movement, and we take it to the national level, and we create a crisis for the people in power until they do what we need them to do for us to survive and live fulfilling, happy lives. So that's where we're trying to head. And hopefully, there's going to be support from these various organizations around the country, around the state, and from our awesome community right here is lots of good people who want to get involved in building with us. So.
Well said. I feel like I almost put you on the spot there, but I knew you could handle it. And I think that's a great segue into, well, what can people do? They're so inspired by your powerful organizing, orating, and they want to take some action, get connected. Do you have some calls to action for the community that we could share?
Sure, yeah. So if you want to learn, we have a website now. If you want to learn more about it, it's cspringsphp.org. And then, in terms of how people can most immediately get involved, we have been working through the housing working group through Colorado Springs DSA. That has been the group that's been talking about how do we start to do tenant organizing in this city. The housing homelessness working group through the Colorado Springs DSA meets the second Sunday of every month
at the Chinook Center, of course, right?
At 5:00.
Okay. Cool. So
if you're interested, if you're like, wow, this tenant movement thing sounds cool, I want to learn how I can become an organizer, or then that would be the place for you. And then if you are a tenant and you're like, man, my landlord is terrible. And I would love to organize my neighbors specifically. If you go on our website, csphp.org, and you go under tenant organizing, there's a thing that says it's like an interest form if you want.
Excellent. So we'd like to hear from you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll share your contact information. Not a problem. Okay.
So those are ways you can get involved.
Excellent. So with that said, kind of approaching our wrap up here, but is there anything else we missed? Good stuff in Colorado Springs and in your life? Got to leave it on a positive here.
I mean, I think we're getting better. We're getting smarter.
We've come a long way.
It's been cool. I've been here long enough. I feel I'm pretty new, but I feel like I've been here long enough to watch people grow into roles that they've taken on in this community. And yeah, I think the problems we're facing are sophisticated. The enemies we're facing are sophisticated, and we're getting sophisticated, and we're gonna win. So that's how I'm feeling about things right now.
Bravo. I like it. That's why we like this guy. I agree. It's been gratifying to see kind of the rooting and the connections that we are making, because you and I have seen each other several years now because we're trying to do the work and we end up crossing paths, and that's what it takes. And so with that said, I'm going to remind everybody that episodes of Justice with Jax are recorded as a member of the Studio 809 Podcast Collective at the Nexus Community Co-working Space in downtown Colorado Springs. And this is a reminder to ask yourself 2 questions. 1, who is telling your story, and what kind of change do you want to make in the world today? So this is Justice with Jax, signing off.